Is spirituality part of Torah? And I guess the first question is, what do I mean by spirituality? Okay, that would be part of that. What I'm referring to is something that makes us want to be involved with Torah on a certain level. See, the thing that people don't recognize in many ways is that Torah is an object. And for someone to be involved with Torah, there has to be a motivation. What makes you want to do this, right? So, it's the same reason when you're driving on the 401, what makes you want to follow the speed limit, right? Any behavior of a human being needs some motivation. So the simplest answer to why someone follows the Torah is yiras ha'onish, being afraid of punishment. It's a God, and in Bill Crosby's famous words, how long can you tread water, right? The fact is that basically do this or else, and that's fear of punishment. Fear of punishment doesn't work too well on a certain level. First of all, you can question whether there really is that punishment or not. I mean, is there going to be that? Question. Second of all, when you look at the idea of who came up with the idea of a wager, you might as well do this. Pascal's wager. The problem with that is when you really look at the various options. Well, there's Christianity, and there's all the forms of Christianity. And there's Islam, and the Sunnis and the Sufis don't really get along too well. And then take Judaism and take all the others. So the truth is that you got a wager. Well, it's not either or. It's like A or B, and So the fact is that. Once you start doing that, you're recognizing that, gee whiz, if I do this, that God will kill me, and if I do that, that God will kill me. So it's not like, if I'm really going to worry about what God's going to get, which God is going to get me, I better have some kind of decision about the God. There was a classic story of a Rosh Yeshiva of mine, who was a bit of a different type of person. And he was walking down the streets of New York City. He was in Manhattan, and he saw a guy on a soapbox, basically, yelling out, you're all, the world's coming to an end. You repent, and so forth and so forth. And this guy was getting together a crowd. And the Yeshiva told us, he said, I was looking and saying, what is it that attracts people to this guy? He's yelling there and says, you better repent, this is happening, the judgment day is coming. So then he figured out it was because he was, scaring the people, whatever. So Yeshiva said, so what I decided to do is I stood on the opposite corner, and he yelled, you believe in a false Messiah. You're in big trouble. You're going to hell, whatever. And he says, well, I started acting like the same way he was talking, I did on the other corner. And all these people who were sitting around, looked at me, looked at him, and walked away. There was one person yelling, you're going to hell. Okay, this is going to scare you a little bit. This guy's saying if you do A, you're going to hell. This guy's saying you're going to B, you're going to hell. I can't figure out which one. I might as well not do either, right? So the truth is, if you really look at Pascal's wager, it's like, you don't have that choice anymore. So the fact is yiras ha'onish is not really what gets people in. This also doesn't get people in the door. If you ask any Kiruv organization, right, Chabad, Aish Torah, NCSY, they do not get people coming through the front door by saying to them, hey, if you don't do this, you're in trouble. Okay. So what really motivates people to do it? So the fact is that that's really an underlying question. So what I've usually found is that there's a motivation for what gets people to do it, And then there's another question of what should be the motivation. And there's a movement from what the motivation is to what the motivation should be, and that should be a process of development also. So there's a reason, in a certain level, that's lo lishmo, bal lishmo. You don't do it for the right reason, you do it for the right reason, for the right reasons. Eventually, it's also part of the learning experience. And that's something that oftentimes is not really done, because to do that, you have to challenge a person's original motivations. So yes, if the motivation to get the guy to come into the shul was because of the blonde who was saying, hey, I go to that shul, then a person could say down the road, well, is Moda Shul and the blonde being there. But there's a lot of motivations where it's unclear of whether they're real motivations or not. So what I usually find is that one of the motivations that people have is nationalism, Jewish identity. People start to become involved because of Jewish identity, right? Be Jewish, do this. Be Jewish, do that. And eventually, a lot of times, the more frum they become is actually a perception of their more desire, or the greater desire to express themselves with Jewish identity. Okay, then comes the issue of, okay, well, is there a problem with that or whatever? But that's one of the motivations. Another motivation is family, right? In the sense of communal, the idea for community, idea of having family, and so forth, the idea of supporting a good family life. A lot of people say, hey, Judaism, especially Friday night dinners, that's the family, and so forth and so forth. So that's another motivation. Okay, but the fact is when you get to each one of these motivations, when you get to like family and so forth, I remember years ago, a young girl, 16 years old, who came over to me and says, what's wrong with intermarriage? So they do their family dinner around Easter, Easter supper, and we do it around the Pesach Seder. But basically all it is family getting together. So the question is eventually you start talking family, then you can extend it to saying, well, if we have an intermarriage, we can have family by everything. The famous scene from 30-something. We have the Christmas tree and the Chanukah, and we now extend that family to be more inclusive and so forth. So there's all these motivations, okay? One of those motivations is spirituality. And that's what I'm talking about here, this motivation called spirituality. Okay? Some kick we get from religion. Now the truth is, Abraham Maslow defined it as a certain state in the mind. He said it really has nothing to do with God, it has something to do with some mind state. And he basically said you can get it from yoga, you can get it from other things and so forth. I remember that there was an article, I think it was a Time or Newsweek article, about lesbians in the convent. The Catholic Church was going to clamp down on lesbianism in the convent. Okay, and they weren't. It's technically not tolerated anyways, but they were going to really lay down some very strict rules in that. And it led to various nuns leaving the nunnery, leaving the convent. And I was always fascinated by what Newsweek said. Newsweek asked them the question, not, well, what do you do with your religious beliefs? I mean, now that you obviously must have believed in Catholicism, now you're leaving it, what do you do with that? It was not Newsweek's question or Time's question. The question is, what are you doing with your spirituality? And the women responded, well, I find spiritual fulfillment through the women's movement. Or I find spiritual fulfillment through some other thing. In other words, it's a spirituality thing of some feeling that people look towards in finding in religion, and then it's an extended psychologically where people say they can find this state, or this desire, through yoga, feminism, something else, right? So the question is spirituality part of Torah? There is this drive out there in the world, and is that really part of the drive of Torah? Is one of the drives of Torah that will lead us to Torah this generic drive of spirituality? Okay? Okay, so what do you guys think? Is it? Is it not? Okay, then one of the questions has to exhibit that is that if it's a generic drive, what makes the Jewish satisfier, i.e. Judaism being the satisfier of this generic drive, what that makes that different? And that's a real issue in terms of a lot of issues of modern day attitudes of religion, especially when we believe in freedom of religion. By bringing freedom of religion, we have made religion much more of a methodology. In other words, it's almost like it's a good idea for everyone to exercise. You want to exercise through golf, you want to exercise through dance, you want to exercise through tennis,
you want to exercise through mincha.
Right, exactly. The fact is if you want to exercise, that's how do you choose exercise? And that's the way a lot of people look at religion. Okay? In fact, and I'm sure I mentioned this to you guys beforehand, the liberal Judaism in England basically said, what's the difference between liberal Judaism and Unitarian Christianity? Right? I mentioned this before, right? There's a pamphlet we put out in England, and liberal Judaism being Reformed Judaism, and the answer was nothing. Just that liberal Jews choose to try and gain their spirituality using Jewish motifs, and Unitarian Christians choose to try and gain their religious spirituality using Christian motifs. But that's an attitude. It's interesting. I just saw something yesterday on the web. I just finished one story. I just saw something yesterday on the web of Muhammad Ali's granddaughter's bat mitzvah. Grandson's bat mitzvah. Bar mitzvah, right.
Wow.
Right. Muhammad Ali's granddaughter's bar mitzvah. Muhammad Ali's grandson's bar mitzvah. And his daughter said, his daughter was married to a Jew. Well, obviously it doesn't seem like that the is a halachic Jew, but within the temple, wherever it was, and the son was given the choice, and he felt Jewish, and he wanted to be Jewish, and the daughter, Emily's daughter, said, my father totally participated. He was very happy with it and was very excited by it, and he did his thing, and he really participated in the bar mitzvah, and that must have been a remarkable thing, Okay, what? Yeah.
Sorry, but I just saw this the other day, and Muhammad Ali said that his mother, had to deal with him converting out of the. She's a fundamentalist.
Baptist,
right?
Right.
And he converted to Islam.
Right.
And now, so why he would be a hypocrite to say, well, if this is
and interestingly enough, that's what he says. Is listen, we're all got one God, and we're all trying to relate to that one God. We're all finding different ways. Okay, and that's basically the attitude of freedom of religion today. Okay, it's a very nice concept. Okay, the reality is none of these religions, in classic terms, believes it. Islam, you don't accept Muhammad, you're an infidel, and what you call the right-wing fanatics are basically, classic Muslims. They tolerate Jews. The Jews are the worst, are the best infidels, but they have the best place. They have the best place in hell. They're sort of like Christianity. I mean, Jerry Falwell. I mean, what can I tell you? If you don't believe in Jesus, you're going to hell. That's what a fundamentalist believes. Judaism is interesting, okay? Because the fact is that one of the things that always hit me within Torah is the fact that we don't really ultimately say what God does. Okay, ultimately, at least my understanding is that we have no idea how God makes His decision in the end, and therefore there are clearly cases of people who are kon olam haba b'sha'ah echad, like in a second, and that really states that you don't, both Jews and non-Jews, we can't really say who is going to hell and who's not going to hell. But there's clearly the idea that in Judaism we believe that the emes is that there was a Har Sinai, right, and that Jesus was not a divine personality, or maybe not even we don't really have an opinion on him. Mohammed, it's not so significant as far as having an opinion on Muhammad either, but the Rambam doesn't really doesn't speak about him in good terms. But the fact is that we generally we do have an emes. We do believe there's a truth, and that's the way classic religions are. Okay, so the truth is that how you can believe in this truth and accept someone who believes not in the truth, that's an interesting question. Classic fundamentalist Christianity, fundamentalist Islam can't do it. Torah can. Torah does do that. And I think I've spoken to you about this before, because Torah understands the acquisition of truth as being a human endeavor and therefore subject to human fallibility. And therefore God looks at us through human fallibility. So the concept of NISHMA, that a person doesn't know any better, is a reality that there's something between the truth and our ability to know the truth. So in a certain way, we don't judge someone on whether they have the truth. We judge someone, or we theoretically believe that God judges someone on the ability for that person to have knowledge of the truth and to have actively rejected it, even though the information is right in front of them. Okay, and nowadays that's becoming more and more difficult. Anyways, but that's a different topic. But the point is that when you think in those terms of a generic spirituality and religion, there's a general drive for religion, and people, choose Judaism, because I have Jewish roots, I was brought up this way, but there's an attitude, especially as you go in more liberal perspectives, that you do it your way, I do it my way, we're all trying to serve the same God. Right? And the question of that would be something like, and what's the underlying drive is generic spirituality. That's really the way religion is studied in universities. I remember years ago, this clearly was years ago, there was a time I was actually contemplating a PhD. And I was either looking at doing a PhD in psychology at York, or I was looking at doing a PhD in religion at U of T. In York, it was interesting. It came down to the fact that all that had to be accepted was my thesis, and I wanted to do something on Judaism and psychology, and ultimately that didn't work out. But I was basically accepted to the program. At U of T, they were interested. Rabbi, let's do a PhD in religion, so on, but I had to do a minor in another religion, and I wasn't interested. And one of the major reasons I wasn't interested was because of the attitude. That it's simply what religion is about is the study of the spiritual drive and the different ways human beings satisfy the spiritual drive. So the reason you had to do a minor in another religion, the way I understood it, was that there was your way of doing of satisfying it, but you had to understand there were other ways. Okay, because it was all down to that generic drive. So anyways, what? At least it's nice music. Right. Okay. So, anyways, so the question is, how do we strive for this? So, what do you do with this generic spirituality that exists in our world today? So that's the real question. Where is the place of that generic spirituality in a Torah perspective? And it's one of the major drives that brings people into the synagogue, brings people more back. People have generic spirituality, and so you would think that sometimes it's good, but if you're going to look at it and say it's a generic drive, what makes it unique that leads you to Judaism? Or are you just going to end up by saying Judaism is just your chosen way of satisfying that drive, not because it's any better or worse? So, one of the reasons I got into this topic was because of a book I read called My Jesus Year by a guy by the name of Binyamin Cohen. And he was a frum guy who spent a year church hopping. He actually had a psak from a Rabbi that said it was okay. His wife, who was a Gioret, the daughter of a Methodist minister, I believe, anyways, his wife said, okay, you can do it on two conditions. A, you don't let me along with you. There's no way I'm going church hopping. And B, you have to get a psak that it's okay. And he said he asked a whole bunch of rabbis, and some Rav Paskin it was okay. Now he actually thanks 3 Ravs in his acknowledgments. So my feeling is mostly one of those 3 Ravs. So I'm trying to figure out which one of the 3 Ravs it was. The fact is that but I was mentioning this to someone, and he said, but you have no proof it was one of those 3 Ravs. Maybe it was another Rav who specifically said, and don't thank me in the acknowledgments either, because I don't, But the fact is that he had a psak that said it was okay, and he went church hopping. And what he said was, his line was, and Jesus made me a better Jew. It seemed that his church hopping and being with all these people involved in religion and spirituality and so forth, gave him a lot of chizuk in his own Judaism, right? And it sounds very nice and so forth and so forth, and it sort of bothered me. It sort of bothered me. But the truth is that I'm in a certain way, yes, no, whatever. I'm trying to figure out. The issue is, what is the relationship of this generic spirituality to the specific drive of following Torah? Okay, and to say that Torah is just another way of getting your spiritual high, but hey, if you want to get it through Jesus, that's okay too, as long as you're getting the spirituality feeling. I'm not really happy saying that, because I think there's some truth to Torah that has to make it unique. So then, the more I tie Torah to being unique, what do I do with this generic drive of spirituality? Okay, and how do I understand it, and so forth. So that's what led me into some of the questions of tonight. Okay. So to deal with this question, I want to start with a statement that's made by Rabbi Dr. Walter Wurzburger. Okay, Rabbi Wurzburger was an editor of Tradition magazine for many, many years.
He officiated at my wedding.
And he used to be a Shara Shemayim, yes. He was a very chashuv person, professor of philosophy at YU. He was one of the foremost talmidim of Rabbi Soloveitchik. And he says that there was a machlokas between the Vilna Gaon and the Hasidim. That Hasidus believed there was a value to the generic spiritual drive. Like, there's spirituality in the world, and there was a value to the generic spiritual drive. Just everyone else was getting it wrong. Jews got it right. But there is this generic drive out there. It's like you have a hunger drive, right? So if you eat fast food, you're satisfying hunger drive, but you're doing it in a non-nutritious way. If you eat good food, you're doing it in a nutritious way. So therefore, spirituality, if you are being satisfied by other systems, you're sort of not getting the real dosage. Judaism is giving you the real feeling. And what spirituality is a feeling of closeness to God. That's what people want. That idea of spirituality is a feeling of closeness to God. What Rabbi Wurzburger argues is the Gra disagreed. Vilna Gaon believed that what you call spirituality has no real value. The fact is that you cannot feel close to God. What you think you're feeling when you feel close to God is simply a physical feeling. Like Maslow, it's a physical phenomenon. It's a physical feeling. Maybe it might have some value in an instrumental way, because if you're feeling it, maybe it will bring you back to the base medrash and you'll learn a little bit. But the only way you can be close to God is by doing mitzvahs. And then you don't feel anything. Now, if you ever read, you don't have to feel anything. If you ever read, but that feeling is not really an intrinsic value. That's nice, you have that feeling, but it's not because you really feel God. It says, what the halacha tells you is you do this mitzvah, and by definition it will make you close to God, but don't expect to feel it, because feeling it is a physical emotion. And ruchnius, spirituality, real ruchnius, you don't feel. Now, if you ever read the book Halachic Man by Rabbi Soloveitchik, in many ways, he describes Halachic Man in a similar state, in a similar idea. Halachic Man follows the halacha and do the action. This makes me close to God, but not because I'm feeling anything. It's just the halacha tells me, that God tells me that you do this action, you're close to me. Okay? But don't expect to feel it, because feeling it is a physical phenomenon. So he says that was a machlokas between the Vilna Gaon and Chassidus, which means that Chassidus accepts some kind of generic spiritual drive, while the Gaon would not accept some kind of generic spiritual drive. So that seems to be a good thing to keep in the background. So what the Gra is saying is, you have all these people searching for spirituality. It's like they're all searching for whatever. You know, searching for Godot, searching for whatever. They want music, they want sex, they want food. Fine, nothing to do with God. Okay? It's a feeling, like like Maslow's drive. But the point is if you really want to be close to God, you do a mitzvah. And then don't expect to feel anything, and the only way you're going to be close to God is because God tells you. Which means if you're not doing mitzvahs, you're not going to be close to God.
So you do and wait.
What?
So you do and you wait.
You do and you wait, yeah. You do a mitzvah.
So, the comment that I was going to make before, which is still quite relevant, is that the idea of generic spirituality is influenced, it seems, by external influences and internal influences. And the question of the internal influences and how they come about can often be a process of the external influences acting first, and then development towards the internalization of it.
You're talking external from outside forces, and internal being psychological mechanisms.
Okay, I'll accept that.
Okay, it happens. I mean, the fact is that what brings someone to this drive for spirituality or whatever. But then again, you have to define what you mean by that drive for spirituality, right? The key point that I'm trying to bring out is that how do I relate as a Jew to a person of another religion as part underlying this, who also has some motivation for being involved in that religion, and is there an overlap between those two motivations? And the more you define an overlap, the more you have to take away the distinctions. I mean, one of the things that people don't recognize in terms of intermarriage is the fact that if you're basically saying we're all good people, right? Listen, if intermarriage meant, okay, in this person's behavior and faith, they sacrifice their children to Moloch, and they rip out the eyes of everyone they capture, right? You're going to sit there and say, no, thank you. It was very easy to argue that Jews were different than non-Jews when the non-Jew over there, it was someone who was basically totally lacking any morality, right? But if the person next to you is a really nice guy, right? And I always find this to be very fascinating when you speak to someone whose child is intermarried, and he brought home the girl, and we are very much against intermarriage, but we met her. A very fine person, really wonderful person, and such a mensch, and you're looking at him and saying, excuse me, I feel like saying, excuse me, stupid, do you think your son wouldn't pick out someone fine? What do you think over there? Like shock. She wasn't Jewish, but she was such a fine girl. And she's wonderful, and makes my husband so happy, and it's remarkable. So, intermarriage works if you come across by saying, and they're all blankety blank blanks, right? But if you come across and saying, guess what? They're ethical as well, and they're fine people. Well, why aren't you going to do an intermarriage? Why, I mean, okay, there's other arguments in the Jewish nationalism and so forth and so forth, but the person basically looks and says, is that really significant? I once wrote an article, it was actually published in the Globe and Mail, about this guy who was going through this tremendous anxiety over intermarrying. He felt terrible about it and so forth and so forth. Then he was talking about the girl he's going out with and so forth and so forth, and it almost talked like, my Globe and Mail article basically was, what do you do? My family are Canadian fans for many, many years. And I'm going out with this girl who's a Maple Leaf fan. And I'm afraid to bring her home to the family. What can I do? And that was I was mocking the whole issue. Oh no, a Maple Leaf fan. Is that all it is to being Jewish? You see all these arguments. Oh no, and you want to maintain the Jewish nationalism. Right, because the Jewish people have been around for 5,000 years. So I should give up the love of my life because the Jewish people have been around for 5,000 years? A lot of the simple arguments we give for intermarriage only work because the people who are giving them are very strong Jewish identity, and therefore they feel it's so important to have a Jewish identity. So how can you give it up? But if you're talking to someone saying, "What are you talking about? Obviously, it's not that important to me," right? Like, you know, I don't really care if the Expos left Montreal. I know you're going to weep for the rest of your life, but you know, I don't really care. So it's like, right. I'm sure there's people still mourning that, right? So the fact is, well, yeah. So the fact is that I mean, I'm being somewhat facetious, but the point is when you think about it. So the truth is that in a certain way, it's almost a statement of our success. If we brought morality to the world, and we were so successful that now out there, all these people are basically nice people, and they're not whipping their slaves anymore, and they're not doing this, not doing that. Gee, that's really successful. One of the results is going to be one of these people saying, "Hey,
let's marry him."
You know, hey, why not? So the fact is that that's a real issue in the sense of, so what makes Judaism unique? And therefore, once you say Judaism is unique, then it has to be, okay, so what is the difference between that and generic spirituality? And that was an issue that got me in that church hopping thing. If the guy really felt that he got chizuk from church hopping, then it looks like, okay, that's because you want to do it that way. But like, what's the uniqueness of Judaism that stands out? Unless you went to all these places and saw, wow, I really see the uniqueness. I really see how I stand out. And boy, I'm happy I'm not going back to those places in a certain way. That's a real issue. Anyways, so that's really what I'm talking about when we talk about generic spirituality. So, the place I'd like to start, and this is going to be a tough topic, because the basic Gemara that we're going to start with is a Gemara that in so many ways leaves us mystified. Because what you have to look at is going back to what are human drives. So Gemara in Sanhedrin talks about a drive for idolatry. It says there's a story of Menashe. Menashe was one of the three kings mentioned in the Mishnah in Sanhedrin that were not Kona Olam Haba. His later shittas that hold the Menashe did tshuva and he did get Olam Haba and so forth and so forth. But Menashe is considered to be one of those kings that really needed to do tshuva. He killed Yoshiyahu and Navi. He's a bad dude for many, many years until he did tshuva and spent 30 years trying to find kapara. What happens in the Gemara is someone I think Ravashi of Chisda says to his shir, we're going to talk about three of our colleagues, the three kings. He says Chaburai, Achav, Yerubim, and Menashe. So Menashe comes to a dream that night to him and said, "Well, what's this you call me Chaburai? I'm your friend? Wait, you think you're friends with me? I'm bigger than you. I'm bigger than you are." So in the dream it sort of goes on. So Menashe says so he says, well, okay, so ask me a shal. Let me hear. So he says, listen, where should you say hamotzi? I don't know. You should say it by the crust. You say the motzi by the best piece of the bread. Okay, so that seems to be a simple question, but it seems to me Gemara makes it into that this is a major indication of Menashe showing you as a big Talmid Chacham. So the person having a dream, the Gemara having a dream says, well, if you're such a big Talmid Chacham, how did you go for Avodah Zarah? How did you become such an idol worshiper? He said, if you were there, you would have picked up your cloak to run to the Avodah Zarah place. Okay, in other words, there was such a drive for Avodah Zarah, right? It even would even capture someone like me and you. You for sure would have been practicing Avodah Zarah, right? And so the next day when the Samara gives his shir, he opens up by saying, okay, we're going to talk about three Rabbosai, three of our masters. In other words, we're going to recognize that they became Rishayim, but Yerava, Machav, and Menashe were not nobodies. Okay, but that's the Gemara. But the key point is, it talks about a drive, the drive for Avodah Zarah. Now, this drive is then analyzed in the famous Gemara in Samach Daled Amud 64a in Sanhedrin. That the Sanhedrin got together after the second Beis Hamikdash was built. The Anshe Knesset Gola got together and said, you know something? This drive for Avodah Zarah is bad news. Okay, if it's around, it's going to cause further tsuras. Because why? Because it was the reason for the destruction of the first temple. Right, Avodah Zarah, Gilul, Rights, and Shifus, right, idolatry, immorality, and murder. Gotta get rid of this drive because people can't handle this drive. It's too bad and too demanding. So they prayed for this drive to be destroyed, and they got a message from Shemayim that the drive for Avodah Zarah is no longer existent. So they said, "Oh, this is great. This is a good thing. Let's try and get rid of another drive that causes problems. So let's go after the sexual drive, right? Because that also caused a lot of problems." So they said, "Okay." So they prayed for another 3 days, and they tried to get rid of the sexual drive. Then on the third day, they said, "Okay, you know something? Someone was ill and said, you know, we need a fresh egg, a freshly laid egg." So they went looking for a freshly laid egg, and there weren't any eggs in the land, new eggs. Said, why? Well, if you get rid of the sexual drive, there ain't going to be any procreation. So they said, okay, this is not such a good idea. So what are we going to do? So they basically said we have to do something to sort of, lessen its power in a certain way, right? But obviously it's got to stick around. Okay, so the sexual drive supposedly got a little bit lessened, and like incest became less desirous or whatever, but the fact is that the drive was still around. So the question exists here is that you have this drive for Avodah Zarah, and that was totally wiped out. You have this drive for sexuality, also, which can lead you to do averas, and that couldn't be totally dried up because there's obviously a good part to the sexual drive. The reality is every drive that human beings have a potential to be satisfied in a positive way and in a negative way, right? So the question emerges, okay, so the sexual drive, we understand what happened there. Yeah, it'd be nice to get rid of the sexual drive, but on the other hand, there are some good things that come out of sexual drive. If you don't have sexual drive, you won't have families, you won't have love, you will be missing a very positive thing. So therefore, that's the challenge of using this drive correctly. So the question now exists, what about the drive for Avodah Zarah? Okay, so they got rid of the drive for Avodah Zarah. So how come it was so easy to get rid of the drive for Zarah, and wasn't there a consequence of getting rid of the drive for Avodah Zarah? So the truth is there's a morale that seems to imply that the Avodah Zarah drive is a unique drive just for Avodah Zarah, that doesn't have any positive side to it. There is a morale that seems to imply that. Okay, that the Avodah Zarah drive is that, and so forth and so forth. But the general perception is that drives generally have a way that it can be positively satisfied versus a way that it can be negatively satisfied. So how do you understand the drive for Avodah Zarah? So there was an article that we actually once published in something called the NISHMA Journal years ago. But I've heard other people say it subsequently, that the fact is there was a cost to the loss of the drive of Avodah Zarah. Is that at the same point in time, you face the end of prophecy. Prophecy ended with the end of the drive for Avodah Zarah. Now they're not mentioned in the Gemara to happen at the same time, but it's very clear it happened at the same time. One of the last three prophets, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi, were all part of the Anshe Knesset Gedolah, all part of the group that got rid of Avodah Zarah. So the truth is there's something that Nevuah is a positive side to this drive that is connected to a negative drive, being this drive for Avodah Zarah.
Are you talking about the drive for Avodah Zarah in Eretz Israel?
Anywhere.
Or anywhere?
Anywhere. We'll see how that extends further. See, there's arguments like this. It's if you look very close in terms of the drive for Avodah Zarah, there's real questions. If you got rid of the drive for Avodah Zarah, there's some interesting things happen in the world. So, for example, the development of philosophy happened after that. Okay, in the beginning of the Second Temple period, you already had the development of Greek philosophy.
But you still had the Avodah Zarah among the Arabs.
Right, you're right. So therefore, the argument is that Avodah Zarah's real drive was lost, and what started being said was a statement called Minhag Avosehem B'Yadehem. That what happened is they maintained their cultural practices, right, which was based on Avodah Zarah, but not because they really had this drive for Avodah Zarah. Lahavdil, it's the same way as people celebrating Christmas today, even though they don't believe anything about the Christmas story. Peace on earth, goodwill, mankind. So the fact is, this is mentioned by a lot of people. We should have mentioned this and so forth. Rabbi Rucha mentioned this. We call Minhag Avosehem B'Yadehem. The fact is, we have the same statement, Minhag Avoseinu B'Yadeinu. The fact is that we follow through in certain things because they're in Minhag that we have from tradition. So the argument is that when Avodah Zarah ended, it wasn't everyone just woke up the next day and said, "Hey, there's no Zeus." Okay, so let's do it. The fact is they still wanted to maintain some aspects of culture and so forth that was tied to this practice. But what started happening was the development of philosophy. And now that becomes significant because really what you have to figure out is what is this drive for Avodah Zarah? If the drive for Avodah Zarah is simple spirituality, if it's saying that there's such a thing as generic spirituality, and there's Avodah Zarah, and then there's the right way of having spirituality fulfilled, which is through Torah, then basically it's the same way as saying it's food, and Avodah Zarah is like fast food, and Torah is like good food. But the fact is that the Avodah Zarah drive was totally destroyed. The question is, what was this drive? Now, this is where there's somewhat of a problem because we don't have the drive to really figure it out. The only thing I'm pointing out is that there seemed to be a balance against that drive, according to certain shittas, by the Nevuah concept. That somehow we were talking about this aspect of Nevuah that maintained a counterbalance to this drive. In other words, whatever the drive was for Avodah Zarah, there was a drive that found its ultimate expression not just in following Torah, but in trying to become a Navi. Now, if you look in terms of Tanakh, they are constantly talking about the B'nai Nevi'im. It seems Nevuah is not just simply a guy who sits back and wants to be a prophet. There were schools of people trying to become a prophet. It seems to be that there was a real drive to become a Navi. You had to be trained to become a Navi, but there was really some kind of academy to become a Navi, some movement to become a Navi. So it seems to be that, and behind it was some major drive that if you misapplied that drive, it would lead you down a path of idolatry. Now, the fact is that one of the reasons this is so difficult to work with is because we're talking about a world that is incomprehensible to us. Because in the world of Nevuah, God's presence was known. Okay, we think back to the miracles of Sinai and so forth and so forth, but you have to remember in the Bayis Rishon, there are miracles every day, open miracles, right? When we talk about on Yom Kippur, right, that everyone was cramped in together like sardines, and next thing you know, they're all bowing down, and everyone found space. They saw open miracles. The question is, if you had all these open miracles, you had. I mean, one of the things that always hit me, and you might remember this because I did this in the CHABURA a couple of years ago, that one of the most fascinating things is what happened with Eliyahu and Achav and Izebel. Okay, Eliyahu challenges the Nevi'ei Baal. Interestingly, we're the prophets of the Baal. Okay, whoever can light my fire, that's the real God, right? So what happens is he says, you guys go first, and they're jumping around, cutting themselves, doing everything so and so to try and get the fire coming. Eliyahu's just sitting there saying, tell me when you're ready. I'm in no hurry. Whenever you're ready, you go. And then you're tired. It says, okay, my turn. Okay, and he takes some water, and he says, just you guys, I just want to drench my altar in water. Okay,
a few times.
Just. Okay, you guys don't mind, right? Right, nothing on my sleeve, right? And he basically says, okay, Kadosh Baruch Hu, please light my fire. And this is fire, okay? And at this point in time, the whole world, like we say, Hashem Hu Elokim, that was the statement that we make at the end of Yom Kippur. That statement is for the people of Yonah, Hashem Hu Elokim. No doubt about it, right? Okay. And then Eliyahu goes and kills all the Nevi'ei Baal, right? And so on. And Achav's there watching
even though they've admitted that this is the case.
Yeah, and okay, but he kills all of them and so forth and so forth. And Achav is there. Achav sees this whole event. Goes home and tells it to Izebel. Right? Goes home and tells it to Izebel. What does she do? She calls over some sentry and says, I want you to deliver this message to Eliyahu. Okay? She says, by this time tomorrow, you're dead. You'll be in the same place where the prophets you killed, my prophets that you killed are. Lady, did you not get that? I mean, like.
No, she didn't get it.
She says, but the same, like. You don't tug on Superman's cape. I don't get this, right? So, and this messenger goes off to Eliyahu, gives a message, right? By next day, within 24 hours, I'm gonna make sure you're dead, right? And what does Eliyahu do? He packs it for Yehuda. He packs it to Yehuda. I mean, like, look at this, and the thing that happens is it's incomprehensible. If you're dealing with God being open and miraculous, so Eliyahu's got fear. Come on, lady, take me on, right? On the other hand, he's got Nigla and Mister. I mean, like I mean, understanding that world, open miracles. You have open miracles everywhere. Okay, so the truth is though, is that it would seem to be that you had some type of magic that existed for idolatry as well. The Pharaoh's people, advisors had tricks up their sleeves also. Point is that you're dealing with something. You're dealing with a world that is incomprehensible, and Nevuah is incomprehensible, and Avodah Zarah is incomprehensible. But the Avodah Zarah seemed to be some type of drive that had something to do with a world that was beyond this world. Okay? And Nevuah also represented something to beyond this world. Okay? Something being a good part to it, some part being a negative part to it. Okay? So that's something that's very powerful there. But that's not generic spirituality. That's something different in terms of why people were attracted to these forces of Avodah Zarah rather than the forces of God. Now, I have a sort of semi-theory like that, and it's just sort of like a theory, but it's something that I find to be very that I'm throwing out here. What really was Avodah Zarah? What were people really striving for with Avodah Zarah? It seems to me that the dilemma that the world had was relating to the one God. That's really the problem. How do you relate to the one God? The Rambam says that Avodah Zarah came about because people couldn't understand how to relate to one God. Okay, he starts off by saying that there were the sun, the moon, so forth and so forth. What he felt was the sun and the moon had certain powers, and God, there was one God, and He gave them powers. And then the world developed the idea that if the officers of the king also deserve to be respected. So the idea is like an angel. Is that if you have an angel shows up, you have to treat the angel with respect. After all, he's a messenger of God. So what happened is they sort of felt the sun and the moon were also officers of God and demanding respect, and therefore there had to be respect there had to be respect. And eventually they forgot about the one God. But there's another argument for why Avodah Zarah developed, and that is the diversity of existence. Okay, how Mars and Aphrodite coexist is a problem. When we talk about monotheism, we talk about Yotze Or Ovorei Hoshech, davening, right? Yotze Or Ovorei Hoshech, creator of life and creator of Choshech. Oses Shalom, right? One who does all. Ubore et Hakol. However, the actual pasuk is Ubore Ra. Okay, the actual pasuk, for which it says creates evil. The fact is monotheism. It's only because of monotheism that you can have the problems of the Holocaust. Okay, monotheism is unbelievable. I mean, it's a real challenge. How do you have the beauty over here, and how do you have the garbage over there? For example, I am a person who hates going to Niagara Falls. Okay, I hate going to Niagara Falls. Okay? Because if you read some of the stories of people who died around Niagara Falls, every time I see the falls, it just breaks my heart. It just breaks my heart. Now you look at it, it's a beautiful scene, Niagara Falls, it's beautiful. Yeah, I like seeing pictures of Niagara Falls. Right? But if I'm standing over there, I think of the tragedies. The fact is a monotheistic God is extremely difficult to understand. Now, this has always created a problem. It's created a tremendous problem the more mystical you are and the more you are involved in thinking about, not thinking in terms of this world. So, for example, Shabtai Tzvi, the famous false messiah, used to go around and say a bracha of Matir Asurim and eat pork. Why? Because Matir Asurim, what it really means is freeing the prisoners. It's a bracha we say in the morning to reflect the fact that we are able to move and free. But Matir Asurim can also technically mean allowing that which is prohibited. Right? So the truth of the matter is, in mystical realms, the idea of something being totally evil is because everything comes from God. So the Shabtai Tzvi people, for example, so that's why with Shabtai Tzvi you had followers after he converted, because he had to go down into the Tumah of Islam to bring up the light. Okay, and then you start having a Jacob Frank idea, who felt he was a reincarnation of Shabtai Tzvi, which basically was every matter of debauchery. And there was a group I read in Greece. I read about them. I know they existed into the 1900s. A group in Greece called the Dome, who basically were Muslims on the outside and were something like Moranas on the inside, who every time, somewhere around January, February, had a special evening where they swapped wives. It's a mitzvah, right? Because this is to do what Shabtai Tzvi did, to make everything kodesh or whatever. So the fact is that in the ultimate perception of monotheism, you really have a problem. And people don't recognize that. Monotheism, if everything comes from God, then that's really where you have a lot of real deep philosophical issues. Okay? Okay? Okay, because especially if it exists. I mean, the fact is that this is an issue Rav Kook had to deal with, especially if things exist. And you see something coming about it. It exists. And if it exists, it has to exist because God wishes it to exist. So therefore, must be God's will and so forth and so forth. So you look at all these things and what could be wrong with it. And the fact is clear definitions of good and evil become very difficult. Okay. So the fact is, on a certain level, what I find is Avodah Zarah is the extreme of trying to give value to everything. Okay? So, for example, one of the most disgusting forms, like for example, avodah zarah was all about, a lot of it had to do with orgies. I mean, the Gemara talks about that the only reason Jews matir to avodah zarah was to matir leim as arayos, to allow them to be involved in sexual impropriety. The fact of the matter is, you see by Pinchas that Zimri, the whole thing with Zimri and what's her name? Who's the woman from Cosby, right? The whole thing was to bring them closer to their idolater and so forth and so forth. And there was this idea of free sexuality and so forth and so forth. Avodah zarah was very open sexuality. I remember that Professor Lakshan, Marty Lakshan, once pointed out something very interesting to me. He said, we talk about Jewish women not being Kohanim, but we don't recognize that in the ancient world they were all high priestesses. Right? You had the priestesses here and the priestesses there. Why were they all high priestess? Because the high priestess was the madam of the town. Because part of avodah zarah was open prostitution. And therefore, when Klal Yisrael said, we're not having women priests, it was a statement that says, this is not what we do in our Beis Hamikdash. The fact is, though, is in a certain way, coming up with definitions of good and evil can be challenged. Well, if everything comes from God, what's wrong with it? Right? It's got to be a good thing. It comes from God. So the fact is monotheism creates somewhat of a challenge. What avodah zarah does is, what I find it to be, is extreme debauchery. One of the most disgusting forms of avodah zarah was Baal Peor, and Baal Peor was basically the way you worship the Baal Peor is by defecating at the altar, basically, because there's no right and wrong, and it's almost the same. So in a certain way, what you see here in terms of nevuah is beyond rationalism. It's nevuah, lahavdil havdei avdalos. Nevuah is the idea of trying to relate to a Kadosh Baruch Hu on a level that's beyond the rational. That's what nevuah is about, right? It's malamin. It's a knowledge of God that is unique. Okay, nevuah is connecting with God, connecting with the one God. That demands, in terms of our understanding of the one God, it's a very, very deep concept, because it means that everything of all these different parts of our being has to find some type of order. And the great challenge when Moshe Rabbeinu says Sadik V'Ralo, I don't understand it, he's basically saying, I'm trying to understand this, but obviously I can't fully understand my relationship with God because I can't understand Sadik V'Ralo or Rosh V'Tov. Right? That something is good happening, why good things happen to bad people, why do bad things happen with good people. I don't understand the order of existence. And God says, yeah, because you're not God. The most you can do is become close to me is by trying to understand it, but that's in a level that's beyond reason. That's beyond reason. So at a certain level, that's the level of understanding of God. The point is the extreme other way of that, which is this idea of also trying to raise beyond this world into some kind of world, right? Is avodah zarah, where basically what you're trying to say is that if everything comes from God, everything has to be valuable. So therefore, debauchery and everything becomes of value. So avodah zarah was that extreme. Yeah.
So would evil.
Yeah.
But then the opposite of this, and this becomes horrifying, is when you have a tragedy, and I'm remembering the fire on Har Carmel a year and a half ago, and some rabbi, and I don't remember who, but it was an Orthodox rabbi of some town, or came out and said, what? People aren't keeping Shabbos. This is what happens.
Yeah.
You see, and there's fire, and these people burned. And I'm thinking, these are the kids that were the prison wardens that went back to save the people in prison, and these are the people who were incinerated.
Yeah, the fact
justifying it because I here in Toronto didn't keep Shabbos this week.
Yeah, the fact is that's why when Moshe Rabbeinu said, and different sheets of whether Moshe Rabbeinu ever had an answer or not. But according to Shittas, it said Moshe Rabbeinu never heard an answer of Tzadik V'Ralo. I think it's best to leave it like that. The point is that there's a chasm between me and God. But you see, what's interesting about this is we're now getting into the issue of how we approach this issue today and how the level of Nevuah and Avodah Zarah approach that level. The fact is that on that level of Nevuah is a certain level of relating to the one God. Okay? In relating to the one God, you have to understand the tremendous challenges that exist that way, just in terms of relating to the one God. This drive for Avodah Zarah was also somewhat part of that drive, but what it did is basically it turned everything into being okay. Okay, because it was and therefore you had all these different forces which were given value because ultimately it had to have value because they existed, right? Or existed. So you think about this in terms of defecating. You have to sit there and say defecating must be a holy thing because it exists, right? Which is it's a way of also sanctifying the deity. This deity, Baal Peor, it's that deity, and therefore Mars becomes sanctified and Aphrodite, all in their own ways or whatever. But the point is that drive to relate to something beyond this world. When Avodah Zarah was removed from the world, which has to be turned to be a drive, okay, the parallel drive that had to be removed was that drive which was to relate to God. Now I forget where I saw this. Maybe the Maral or Marsha, who talks this about in terms of dvekas. That actually I think it might be the Marsha on the Gemara Baal Peor, that there was a desire to be connected to this deity as compared to connected to God. Okay, something in a world that's beyond us, in a world that is even beyond the world of mysticism today, but a world of relating to a other world, which is around us. We don't have that today because we don't have miracles today. But the fact is that there was a drive for that. There was a drive to relate to a world around us, and this drive, it gets back to, when I go back to, let's say, a drive of eating versus things like that. You have to look at what is a drive about. As a drive becomes correct, you also have to define your drive, educate your drive. So, for example, going back to sexuality, in terms of the Gemara talking about sexuality, there's a connection between sexuality and reproduction. There's also a connection between sexuality and love. The fact is, we on simple ways can look at it in terms of sexuality being base sexuality, which is basically just physical, or we can talk about love and sexuality and so forth and so forth. But the truth is, as we get into love and sexuality, how often do people understand that physical attraction is connected to love? You know, in terms of, boy, that person looks good, next thing you know, I'm having kids with that person. Why does the fact that I'm physically attracted to that person have anything to do with me basically saying I want to live my life with that person? Therefore, in a certain way, you have statements in Shidduchim that they say, it doesn't matter what the person looks like, right? You just want to marry which is good neshama and so forth and so forth. It's going to be, because it doesn't really matter anything physical, but that doesn't work. That's not what the drive is about. There is a physical drive that somehow, the sexual physical drive, that is supposed to connect to love and to an establishing of a future. The point is, it's obviously very different than the physical drive that doesn't have that dimension. What we're talking about in terms of Torah is that there are drives, and those drives can become certainly developed certain ways or other ways, but there is that base drive, and the drive has to develop. What I think happened with Avodah Zarah is that there was some drive to relate to some realm that was beyond us, a realm of miracles, a realm of relating to God, and that realm, if it was allowed just to hang out, just to be, right, like you'd end up with orgies and debasement and debauchery, because the fact is you could basically say because everything's God. But then you had to say, from a Jewish perspective, you had to develop to become a Navi. You had to figure out how to take all these aspects of humanity and connect it into this realm of the supernatural. And that was the challenge of the Navi, in terms of being beyond just this world, in terms of relating to God and being Davik with God, even somehow having some connection with God, in terms of, and with the understanding that how this one God relates to this world is mystifying. Now that's a level which we don't have anymore, because we don't have Nevuah and we don't have Avodah Zarah. But we do have is the intellectual challenge. So if you look at it in terms of the Mishnayos and Avos, it says Nevi'im passed it on to the Anshe Knesset Gedolah, and the Anshe Knesset Gedolah was the start of the Chachamim. Right now, there's a question. There's no doubt. Yoshua was a Chacham, Moshe was a Chacham, the Zekanim were Chachamim, and so forth. You look into the Pirkei Avos, it talks about Zekanim, Nevi'im were Chachamim, and so forth and so forth. Shlomo Melech was part of that world. It was no Chacham of Shlomo. But the truth is what occurred with the end of Nevuah is the understanding of God had to go to the realm of the mind, because the mind had to deal with the issue that was Moshe Rabbeinu's issue of Tzadik V'Ralo. It's the mind that sees God and says, how does the one God find expression in this spectrum of existence? And that becomes a tremendous philosophical question. It now becomes an intellectual question. So the movement of understanding oneness now moves to the mind. And that's what happened with the Chachamim. That's what happened at Knesset Gedolah. And that's also what happened in the world. Because the world started becoming philosophical. The world started adopting Greek thought. At the exact same time that you had the Second Temple, you had the spread of Hellenism, the spread of intellectualism, which had philosophical ideas. In the beginning, they still worked with Zeus. They still tried, but the idea is trying to deal with how does one God find expression through such diversity. And that's the great intellectual question of theology. And that's always the challenge of why people do go towards polytheism, but it's no longer that drive for polytheism. It's all a matter of trying to explain things. But what's happened was, with the drop of the drive to idolatry, things became, how do I understand life? Became an idea of how do I understand life? And that's where you now see, in certain ways, yes, there's this generic spirituality, which has some aspects of, I want to relate to God and so forth, but really the underlying drive of generic spirituality is trying to understand life. What's the meaning of life? And the underlying question of that meaning of life is, how does one God have such a diverse world? And we're dealing with it today. How does and one of the ways we're dealing with it is by trying to deny that there's one God. I mean, the fact is, if you look at homosexuality, for example, one of the real issues is, how does one God create people which rise for people of the same sex? That's a tremendous theological question, which leads people saying, you're right, doesn't make sense. That's why you have an outgrowth of atheism nowadays. Atheism being an attempt to try and explain this world. But all those questions of trying to explain this world is because we're trying to grasp it, because really in the end, morality becomes an issue. We still have moral drives. Why is it that we feel it's right not to kill someone? Forget the philosophical, oh yeah, we have some philosophical arguments. Society won't work if people are trying to kill each other. But the fact is we're talking about that moral drive. So nowadays, that generic spirituality is, what is life about? So in a certain way, I'm sort of sidestepping the Gra Hasidus argument. They have their argument, and it has something to do with whether you feel God or not, and so forth and so forth. But there is another generic spirituality that does exist in the world. And that is this generic spirituality of what is life about. But in that regard, it's extremely important to recognize that Torah has a unique answer. And that becomes what's unique with Torah. But it's not to the extent because of Torah's unique answer that every other answer is wrong. It doesn't have to be that every other answer is wrong. When I say by wrong, it doesn't mean that they don't have certain details within that idea which could have some benefit. Now the truth is that doesn't even go to other religions. That's Rav Kook dealt with that in terms of his attitude towards the Chilutzim. He basically said, wait a second, they're doing something right, so there's got to be something right in what they're in the way they're thinking. Okay? In other words, it doesn't have to be perfect, doesn't have to be 100%. But obviously within Torah, we're trying to get the answer, because the real answer is how does everything come from that one God? So the fact that other faiths exist to a certain extent and promote certain values doesn't necessarily have to be rejected by Judaism. But the bottom line is that the thing with generic spirituality is really challenging. I think it's the challenge of trying to understand what life is about. And what I think this Torah is saying is that it's not just another method of saying, hey, this is what life is about. It's not just methodology. It's not just saying every religion basically says life is about peace, order, and good government, or motherhood and apple pie. It's just that you like cherry pie and I like kishka pie. But the fact is it has to be that really, from a Torah perspective, we are arguing something about what that oneness is about. And the oneness of Torah basically recognizes that it's the outgrowth of the mind. It's the mind that is the key in trying to understand this issue. Not because it can never understand the issue, but it's got to be the way to try and deal with the issue. There's Rabbi Turin, our senior scholar, made an interesting point to me once. He says the Rambam says the whole purpose of existence is trying to know God. He says that's the whole purpose of existence. But he also says that it's impossible to know God. So he's basically saying the purpose of existence is to be Sisyphus, always trying to understand God, but you can never really get to understand God. And the fact is that's a very, very, very significant answer. Because the point is there's value in the process itself. That's what Torah really argues for. Because the idea is that we aren't going to understand God. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't get an answer to Tzaddik Geralo. Okay, human beings cannot know God ultimately. Most we can find is his back. But it's in the process of understanding that dilemma of trying to understand how oneness can find its expression through the diversity of existence that we can try and gain an understanding of this life to the best of our ability. And that is what I think the generic spirituality is about. Okay? Not necessarily what Maslow's feeling is and so forth and so forth, but I think people are struggling to saying, what is life about? And Torah has its own unique answer. Okay, but in a certain level, it accepts the fact that everyone's trying to struggle with that answer. We have, yes, the answer, but that doesn't mean that every other answer is wrong. That's why we don't have to say that anyone who doesn't get the right answer is going to hell, right? Because we're much more into process.
Right.
So a person who's struggling and so forth and so forth, and gets somewhere and struggling, even though his conclusions may not be Torah conclusions, right? That's up to God to judge. He's the final, gives the grade, right? Any questions or? Yeah.
So the idea of sort of dualism and religions that sort of have much more of an idea of a heaven and hell and a God and a devil, are they kind of fleeing away from like the intellectual terror of monotheism and saying, okay, that's too hard to wrap our minds around. It's easier to think that evil must be something external that's going to be dealt with in a concrete way.
Yes, yeah. And the clear point is that one of the problems with Christianity from a Jewish perspective is not just the Trinity. I mean, the Trinity comes from the fact that it's an attempt to deal with the problem of monotheism. Okay? And it's a struggle, how you understand it. But the truth is, I felt that the existence of Satan in some Christian perspectives is an even bigger problem. Because what you're trying to avoid is the real dilemma. You're trying to say, the devil made me do it. Satan's the bad guy. And it really is. That's why from a Jewish perspective, Satan is just another angel. His job is to be prosecuting attorney. But the fact is that he doesn't have independence. But it's not just in terms of evil. It's not just, and if you really look at it, it's almost it's not just the problem, how does evil exist? It's the fact that black and white evil is so difficult to deal with. I mean, you guys all saw the Godfather? Now, when Don Corleone dies in The Godfather, you guys are sad? You feel kind of sad? Right? Now, why do you feel sad when this guy is a monster, is killed? Because he seems to be a nice old man. Right? After all, his original killing was to protect his family. And the guy who had the horse head in bed, he wasn't too nice a guy anyways, right? The fact is that if you look at it, it's remarkable. And I watch this in Hollywood all the time, right? Yeah, but Hollywood all the time. Exactly, and the fact is you're rooting for the bad guy, and it's like, I remember an old Mad magazine thing they used to run. Mad magazine had a thing like, who really is the bad person, who's really the good person? So they show the good guy being tortured by the evil guy. And he's over a pot of burning lava, and the flame is hitting over there, and the evil guy says, Mr. Bond, how nice of you to drop in. Right? I'm sorry I can't stay for too long here, but it seems that you'll be leaving soon. And Mad Magazine says, look at the polite language. Thank you for dropping in. Nice to see you and see you. Now look at the other guy. You blankety blank blank. When I get out of here, I'm going to blankety blank you. And says, what vulgar language, right? Not a nice person. And the fact is that it's remarkable how we're played with. But the point is that in certain ways, we don't want to confront the real challenges of dealing with evil. We liked Saddam Hussein's son being a total pig, right? Okay, we hear stories about how Adolf Hitler, Yamach Shemo, liking animals and being a vegetarian. It's like chalk. It's like fingernails on the chalkboard, right? Okay. When I talk to people and say what really was the evil of Adolf Hitler, he was a very strong nationalist. Well, nationalism has a good connotation. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but the truth of the matter is, if you're such a strong nationalist that you forget universalism, you become a Russia. The truth is how many times in history you see Rishas is really the overextension of what could possibly be a good drive. Well, that makes people very uncomfortable because it's easier for us to deal with it. But those are exactly the issues that we have to deal with. And it's in dealing with those issues that I think we really deal with trying to understand God. And that's what makes Judaism a cognitive religion. It's because we try to deal with these issues. That's really what we're trying to do. Okay, and not in the monastery way, but as we live. And that's really our struggle. And in a certain way, that is our spirituality. Okay? And the point is that in a certain way, in many ways, I think many people are driven by generic spirituality, trying to find a meaning in life, but when they find something easy to give them meaning, I remember once I went to a Beach Boy concert. It's a really, really great experience, like really high. I remember, I think it was some other girlfriend at the time. I said, "Boy, wouldn't it be great if shul was like this?" and it dawned on me that yeah, it will give you a high, but the fact is what you're really looking for is some kind of expression, some kind of feeling like that. But the fact is that we have feelings like that, but the truth is it's not really cognitive. It doesn't give depth to it. And that's what we're dealing with. And that's really what happened with the removal of Avodah Zarah. We became that the only way of really understanding God was cognitively. Because the only way of understanding God is in that confrontation with his mystery. So it's really, I mean, in a certain way, you know, we try to avoid it, but the whole concept of God, okay, is that, and it's very hard for people to understand this, is you look at the classic reason for classic argument for the need for a creator. Everything in this world is cause and effect, right? Everything in this world is cause and effect, right? So therefore, what caused the creation of this world? There had to be a cause. So therefore, you have the classic philosophical answer: the first cause, or the first mover. Okay? So you got another question: so who created the first cause? What you're really saying is, I believe in an entity that is not bound by the dimensions of existence as I understand it, and I believe in an entity that, because he is outside of my frame of reference, created this world. But by definition, it's because I believe in an entity. In other words, there's only one way for this world of cause and effect to have been created, by an entity who's not bound by cause and effect, therefore not bound by what I can understand, not bound by time, not bound by anything, creating this world. What you're basically saying is, I believe in something I have no comprehension of. And that's our struggle. And every atheist comes back and says, what?
No way to prove.
Right. Ultimately, because the fact is that you basically, but the argument of first cause is there. So atheists have a problem. Well, I don't want to accept that answer because it's outside of this dimension. So good. So where did life come from? I don't know, but we'll figure it out one day. But my answer is, okay, something outside of my comprehension created it. But you know what that means? It means that it's a world. That ultimately is the challenge of theological existence. And that's what I think is the aspect of meaning to life and so forth and so forth that we're all striving for. Torah has its own unique answer to it. Okay? It's not having the Maslow N thing, although that might be something involved there in some way. I'm not going to get the Mahogas Gra and the Chassidim, but the fact is that that's why I found a little bit of difficulty with my Jesus here, is the fact that it obviously brought him back. It did something very positive to him, but on the other hand, I looked at it and said, wait a second, did it take him to the uniqueness of Torah? And that's really where generic spirituality, the question of revelation, and Har Sinai basically says generic spirituality has to take you to some unique answer.